coming on the air with breaking news down in Georgia. Murder convictions for all three men accused of killing Ahmaud Arbery last year. All of those defendants now face life in prison in a case that helped spark that national reckoning on race in this country, with Arbery's mother saying her son can finally rest in peace. We're one-on-one coming up in a minute with the attorney for Arbery's father, plus an NBC News exclusive on the mysterious Havana Syndrome. You know that thing, that sickness that's hit hundreds of CIA officers and diplomats? Now the FBI says even their agents, too, with the U.S. sending a new warning to Russia tonight. And on this Thanksgiving Eve, one of the busiest travel days since the pandemic started, a new announcement from the Attorney General. Wait till you hear I was cracking down on bad behavior on planes. Yeah, and that surge in people moving around, potentially triggering a COVID surge. But is that already here? We're talking about it. And speaking of Thanksgiving, tomorrow marks 400 years since white settlers celebrated the day for the first time. But for the Native Americans already living on the land, it's a day bringing up generations of painful memories. We'll hear those stories. And if you're ready for some football tomorrow, so is Michele Tafoya, prepping for tomorrow night's Thanksgiving game. But tonight, she's with us for the backstory on what it's like on and off the field. Hey, I'm Hallie, and we're going to start by setting the scene of what it was like in Georgia late today in that courtroom when the three men accused of murdering Ahmaud Arbery were convicted. Watch.
Count 1, malice murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 2, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Greg McMichael, guilty. Count 3, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, William R. Bryan, guilty.
Those verdicts delivered by a nearly all-white jury after almost 2 days of deliberations in this case, with Travis McMichael, as you saw there, guilty of all 9 counts he faced, including malice murder. He's the only defendant to be convicted of that charge. Greg McMichael found guilty on 8 counts, including felony murder. William Bryan, Roddie Bryan, as he's known, also guilty of felony murder among the 6 counts he was convicted of. And this is Ahmaud Arbery's mother, very emotional, as those verdicts were read inside court. You can see her putting her head down there. Afterwards, this is what it looked like outside court. That's Arbery's family, their attorneys, supporters leaving with their arms raised, with Wanda Cooper-Jones saying this to the crowd that gathered there tonight.
I never thought this day would come. But God is good. You know him as Ahmaud. I know him as Quez.
Yes.
He will now rest in peace.
Yes. Amen.
Joining me now from outside the courthouse is Sam Brock, who's been covering this. Sam, our viewers know you've been out there. And listen, so many people had been waiting and watching for this day. And there is so much emotion here, not just from the family, but we heard it from the prosecutor. We heard it from the defense, too. Talk to me about the moments that are standing out to you tonight.
There's quite a few that stick out. And Hallie, good evening. Good to be with you. Certainly one of them you just showed a second ago. That moment in time when the judge in this case read off that first guilty verdict for Travis McMichael, and you could hear someone in court, against the decorum that's established, cheer. It appears to be Marcus Arbery, Ahmaud Arbery's father, who did. But you could understand from that parent's perspective why that would have been such a relief. And that did stand out. After the fact, we find everyone come outside, which is so quiet right now, but there were hundreds here earlier. And Wanda Cooper-Jones says, now my son can rest in peace. That really struck a chord, too. Those were the big ones, but just the everyday folks that were out here commenting as well. Hallie, I interviewed a father who has lived here his entire life. He's 53 years old. He's about to go to his job at 5 o'clock tonight. I guess he's there right now at the paper mill from 5 p.m. until 5 a.m. He has 4 sons. He said, I broke down when I heard that verdict. And the reason I did is because that could have happened to any one of my boys. It could have happened to your neighbor's son. It could have happened to your friend's son. It could have happened to anyone in America's son. And that just really, I think, embodied some of the feeling out here right now. We've been watching for so long as we've seen situations like this, typically involving people of color, and vigilante behavior as it's been characterized, folks who have acted with some sense of entitlement, and that the legal system has not always found its way to accountability for them. At least that's what many of these communities feel, how they feel after so long. And Al Sharpton said it best. He said that Brunswick, Georgia, now finally showing that we can turn the tide, turn a chapter on history here and what we've seen for so many years in this country.
Yeah, I had the chance to talk with Reverend Al Sharpton, who's been close to the family today as well. He's really echoing that. We also talked a little bit about this piece of it, Sam, the steps of what's next, because the defense attorneys here say they plan to appeal. And listen, legal experts say that doesn't seem very likely, right? We don't know, but likely that that's not going to be successful. Really, the next step for them in the immediate future is the sentencing. And these defendants face decades in prison, regardless of the fact that some of them were guilty of felony murder versus malice murder here.
Right, and I guess the question becomes, what exactly are they appealing? There were motions for a mistrial during closing arguments based on the interpretation of the citizen's arrest law that is no longer on the books, Hallie, in Georgia. And the reason that it's not is the legislature and the governor in a conservative state here in Georgia decided this has got to go. Its application dates back to a time when there were law enforcement officers on horseback that took hours, if not days, to get there, and there was more policing from individuals. Clearly here, the idea that a crime may or may not have been witnessed, there would have been probable cause for a citizen to go out after a fellow community member with a shotgun and multiple pickup trucks counter him and corner him, I should say, not knowing exactly what he'd done and claim a life. Those are sort of the grounds that were being debated. If a citizen's arrest would be allowed here, perhaps the crowd, there were certain conversations being had about whether if they were too loud, that it might have disrupted the jury during its proceedings. Some of the defense attorneys raised that. But I did speak with Kevin Goff, who's the attorney for William Roddie Bryan, who said he does plan to appeal the decision today, but has to respect the justice system and the decision made today.
Sam Brock, live for us there on what I know has been an incredibly busy day for you, busy several days. Sam, thank you for being with us to bring us this very big developing news tonight. I appreciate it. One of the other emotional moments today, Ahmaud Arbery's father, Marcus, telling reporters today was a good day and calling on people from here to keep up the fight.
For real, all life matters.
All life.
Yes. Not just black children. We don't want to see nobody go through this.
Amen.
I wouldn't want to see no daddy watch their kid get lynched and shot down like that.
That's right, Mom.
So it's all our problem. It's all our problem.
Marcus Arbery joins me now, along with his attorney, Ben Crump. I want to say a good evening to both of you. Thank you both for being with us. Want to make sure you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Arbery, I have to ask, we've seen you now on the courthouse steps. You've had a few hours to sit with this verdict. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. It's a lot of relief on me after I got that guilty verdict.
Relief? Is it celebration in your view, or is it just relief here?
It's just relief. Ain't no celebrate because Maud's still in here.
Yeah.
He gone.
Can you talk to me, sir, about that moment in the courtroom? We showed it earlier on in the broadcast. And I actually spoke with, as you know, Reverend Al Sharpton, who was with you and your family there, who said, you had a moment of almost jubilation when that first guilty verdict came down. Can you tell me what that moment was like for you? What was going through your mind?
When they got the guilty verdict for the trigger man, I already know the rest of them were finished. Because he the one really did all the shooting, but they played a part in that too. There was a lynch mob all together, but he really was the trigger man. He knows exactly what he was doing. So anytime you shoot somebody 3 times, that just out of hate and rage. And so when they read that guilty verdict on him, I already know we were gonna get some justice.
So for you, once you heard that first guilty verdict, you thought you knew how the dominoes were going to fall?
Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Crump, I want to bring you into the conversation here. In a statement after the verdict came down, you talked about the deep cracks in our justice system. You talked about the idea that this was at least some peace for the Arbery family, but the systemic changes that still need to happen. I wonder if you can explain that here in light of this verdict.
Certainly, Hallie. I thought this verdict was very important today here in Brunswick, Georgia, by those 11 white people and 1 black person who made up that jury to say that we want to tell America we must be better than what we saw in that video. And even though we know this is but one measure of justice for the Arbery family, it did speak to everybody in the world that even though we know this unfortunately won't be the last time a person of color is unjustly killed in a racially charged situation, we know that there are jurors who will come and sit, who come from a different perspective, different background than Ahmaud Arbery than George Floyd, but they too understand that Ahmaud was a human being and he was worthy and deserving of every American constitutional promise that is granted to every citizen just by breathing their first breath as an American. That's what this verdict means.
Mr. Arbery, given the racial rhetoric that we saw in this case from some of the defense attorneys over the last several weeks in this trial, were you surprised by how this verdict came down?
I really was, because this is why Ahmaud in his grave now on account of racial profiling. And then you got lawyers, they still bring that to the court. It just really devastating. That just showed you where their professional was at. They wasn't no good professional lawyers. You really didn't help your clients with that. So it really was disappointing to me. Because Ahmaud, he didn't grow up on no post side of the bed. Me and his mom worked hard and made sure our children had everything they need.
Yeah. Do you think if there hadn't been video, sir, that these three defendants would have been convicted?
No.
No, but it's just terrible that we got to have video to get justice. It should be better than that. America should be better than that.
Yeah, and let me speak to that if I could, Hallie.
Please.
As a person who's done these type of cases, these civil rights cases where black people have been killed unjustly, we do not want to have the precedent where if we don't have video, then we are denied access to the courthouse. Heavy on my heart as we received this verdict and was relieved was the fact that Breonna Taylor, who was killed unjustly, but because there was no video, it seemed as if her family was locked out of the due process that they deserved. And so hopefully we can use this as a momentum to do better. The spirit of Ahmaud defeated the Georgia lynch mob.
Mr. Arbery, before we go, obviously these defendants still face federal hate crime charges. There is still more down the road from a criminal perspective for them. Do you believe that they will continue to face accountability? And Mr. Arbery, what is your mission now in the name of your son?
The mission now in the name of him, I just want him to be remembered as a good boy, and his family loved him, and who all knowed him, they know what kind of boy he was. He was a good-hearted boy, and all you had to do is talk to him.
Yeah.
You know, his heart was bigger than life.
I can tell. I know this is emotional for you and your family, and I know Thanksgiving tomorrow, empty chair for Ahmaud Arbery. Mr. Arbery, Mr. Crump, thank you both so much for being with us tonight. I really appreciate your time on what has been, I know, a very long day for the both of you. I appreciate it. I want to bring in now, of course, NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos. Danny, Mr. Arbery, Mr. Crump there, you heard it from them, and you heard Mr. Arbery say he was surprised by the verdict. Were you?
No, I was not surprised. I thought it was a pretty strong case. I can understand Mr. Arbery being surprised because it's just he had so much invested in it that, I mean, I know I would be if I were him just thinking, oh, God, there's no way this is going to go my way, just because that's the way I'm wired. I totally understand being that way as well. But objectively, this was a likely conviction, certainly for the lead defendant, Travis McMichael. Then after that, of course, Greg McMichael. There was a chance of an acquittal, I thought, for Bryan, the third defendant, and you saw that he was convicted of the least crimes. The jury apparently concluded that because he never held a firearm, he couldn't be held accountable for the aggravated assault with the firearm, but they did find him guilty of felony murder because they concluded that he was driving around, blocking Arbery, falsely imprisoning him, and committing aggravated assault by scaring him with the motor vehicle.
How do you see this verdict, Danny, in light of something that you and I talked about last week, which was the acquittal of Kyle Rittenhouse in another very high-profile trial that was happening right around this same time? Both of these cases fueling this bigger national discussion about vigilantism.
The Rittenhouse case and this case both involved self-defense, but this case involved citizen's arrest, which is an odd, antiquated, and I would argue a law that we don't really need because we have self-defense laws, and self-defense allows for defense of another. We have plenty of laws that protect you, protecting your property. Open carry laws, after all, in those states, I mean, allow you to carry a firearm in the open. So we have plenty of overlapping laws that give people safety and the right to protect themselves. I just don't see the need for an 1860s era law that deputizes people in their own mind. If they think, oh, I think I see a crime, I'm going to run around in my truck and with my open carry firearm. It's
hard to forget, and I think it's worth reminding people that the death of Ahmaud Arbery, the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, the death of Breonna Taylor, the murder of George Floyd, and it was Floyd that sparked it, but all of them fueled this national reckoning on race that we went through as a country, a year and change ago here. And this now is a verdict in a significant moment for this country as we sort of move forward and grapple with that. Fair?
Absolutely fair. I mean, look, the criminal justice system has always had problems because you have disparate impact on people of color. What exactly that means, it's incumbent upon the justice system to figure that out. And so you have an example here. And, we should be relieved that because of the proliferation, I know that Ben Crump just said, look, there aren't always videos to figure out what happened, but the good news is that we're having video more and more and more, whether that's dash cam, body cam, or just our own iPhones that we're running around with and able to film things. There are so many crimes in the last decade that might never have come to justice if not for an iPhone. And ironically, in this case, you have one of the defendants who supplied the evidence against himself.
Danny Cevallos, thank you so much for your analysis here tonight on all this developing news that has happened just in the last few hours. Appreciate your time. Tomorrow, as all of you know, is Thanksgiving, and that means people today are heading out in huge numbers. Tens of millions of people on their way to spend the holiday with family and friends. Maybe you're watching this from an aunt's house or a grandma's house. It's not just the travel surge, though, but the COVID surge that has healthcare workers really concerned, with cases and hospitalizations already going up in the Northeast and Midwest right now. Just look at these headlines from some of these papers around the country. In Minnesota, COVID hospitalizations set a 2021 record once again. In Illinois, it's the worst of the Delta-driven summer surge. And then in New Hampshire, COVID cases are at its highest in the pandemic ever, with the governor predicting a bumpy road ahead. That is the landscape around the country right now. Our Dr. John Torres joins us. So, Dr. John, with that backdrop here, we're now talking about this surge that is almost certain to come after the holiday. When you hear the cases are going up in 30 states, what does that tell you about what this surge post-Thanksgiving is actually going to look like, the stress that that's going to put on the healthcare system?
Hallie, I think you're right. It's going to put a big stress on the healthcare system. I don't think it's going to put as big a stress as we had last year, and here's why. Last year, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, we had 195,000 cases here in the U.S. Within a month and a half, we were up to almost 300,000 cases. This year, we're at 95,000, 100,000 less. One of the big differences, there are 60 million people who have not been vaccinated, but there are almost 200 million people fully vaccinated in the country, and that's what's keeping those numbers lower than they were last year. But like you mentioned, it still is climbing, and that's a concern because we know once families start getting together, once people start congregating, those numbers are going to go higher again. But most experts think it won't go as high as it did last year, keeping our fingers crossed that that's true, and the hospitalizations won't rise quite as rapidly, and neither will the deaths. So I think we have some bit of relief from that, but not nearly enough, because you're seeing from the headlines there that some hospitals are already starting to get to the point where they're reaching capacity. We want to make sure that doesn't happen more and more often, Hallie, especially after the holidays.
How much will booster shots, I should say, help on that front? Because there's this interesting discussion that's happening now around some of the country's top health experts, like Dr. Anthony Fauci, who are saying, okay, fully vaccinated, we know to be 2 shots for Moderna and Pfizer, the other for J&J. Should boosters be included in that definition of fully vaccinated? Should that be on the table at this point?
I think at this stage, not yet, mainly because we still have those 60 million people that have not even gotten that first 1 or 2 vaccines, depending on which one they get. And we want to get them captured first. We want to make sure that they get vaccinated and then start talking about boosters. Plus, you have to remember, being fully vaccinated protects you from serious illness, hospitalizations, and death. Might not protect you as well from getting COVID in the first place. That's where boosters come in. So let's get the first set of people fully vaccinated, then start working on the boosters. I think that's our best plan right now, and the best way we can move forward, encouraging people to get boosters as much as possible. Yeah. My guess is, by springtime, we might be talking about boosters being fully vaccinated.
In a tiny nutshell, Dr. John, tomorrow, Thanksgiving dinner, if you're spending, time with family, I'll be honest with you, before I came on the air, I stuck a swab up my nose for a rapid test just to make sure that I'm good when I see, vaccinated adults tomorrow. Is that the best practice here? Should people be in masks when they're not eating? What would you recommend for a typical family gathering?
You know, the first thing I would recommend is simply ask the question, are you vaccinated? And saying, hey, I'm not judging, I'm just asking so we know how to make things, arrange things, especially for those that are more vulnerable. And if you can get a hold of tests, have some tests that people can take. It's a simple test, like you mentioned, takes about 15 minutes. Mine just came back a couple hours ago negative. I want to make sure I'm safe for the holidays. That's one of the best things we can do. And then if there are vulnerable people, especially the elderly or those that are young and can't get vaccinated, then think about masks, think about opening windows. But the main thing, Hallie, is just to really enjoy this. Don't judge anybody, but just find out what their vaccination status is, so that way you can arrange the settings, you can arrange where people are, and you can still have a good time.
Dr. Torres, great to see you. Thanks, Dr. John. Appreciate it. Happy Thanksgiving, sir.
You too.
Speaking of that travel surge, by the way, we are in it. The TSA says they expect 20 million people are going to be traveling in this week and a half period. And that sounds about right? TSA checked in more than 2 million people every day since last Friday. And we just learned something from the Attorney General. Merrick Garland is telling U.S. attorneys to make prosecuting federal crimes on airliners a priority. Why? Because the DOJ is worried about bad behavior on planes. Squad Venegas is up at LAX. Squad, we've talked a lot about bad behavior on planes. We've seen those videos that have gone viral of people acting like jerks on an airplane, right? Now, this is getting the attention of the Attorney General of the United States. Seems like a particularly well-timed announcement given all this travel coming up.
Hallie, correct. The Department of Justice worried because of this increase in incidents, criminal behavior on planes. They say they've received more than 5,000 reports of these incidents on airplanes, and they're now making it a priority to prosecute them. The memo that they issued today also states that there is a protocol now in place for them to communicate with the FBI and the FAA in order to get the information from the people that commit these crimes on planes to investigate and, of course, prosecute them. So this is a strong message for everyone traveling on a plane that now U.S. attorneys across the country will make it a point to focus on these incidents happening on the planes, Hallie.
I can't help. That's all right. I can't help but look at what's behind you there. I've traveled in and out of LAX probably 100,000 times. Those lines don't look terrible for check-in, right? How's it been today? What about customer service? We've heard of these just horror stories from folks as travel has started to pick back up, as more and more people get vaccinated and start to travel. What's the latest where you are? How's it looking?
Right, Hallie. So as we look at the people that come in, we've been talking about this all morning. We expected larger crowds, but it's been busy. It's definitely been busy, much busier than last year. The numbers so far that we've seen this week, we're talking a little more than twice as many passengers as we saw when the pandemic, was with all we had all these restrictions last year. But the numbers are not where they were in pre-pandemic years. So we had more travelers in 2019. We're a little under that, but the airports also have prepared for people coming back and taking these flights. We saw all these cancellations from 2 airlines at least having these issues last month. The airlines have made changes. They prepared. There's incentives for some of the employees. Earlier, we spoke to officials here at LAX who told us so far it's been relatively smooth with the changes that the airport has made, and the airlines are also working pretty well today. Now, we also know that usually the busiest day of travel during this travel period is the Sunday after Thanksgiving. That's when the highest number of travelers is expected. So we'll have to wait and see how Sunday goes by at all the airports across the country.
Squad Venegas, thank you much for that report, my friend, live from LAX. Happy Thanksgiving. Coming up here on the show, an NBC News exclusive you'll only see here. The FBI says some of their agents may have come down with symptoms of this bizarre mystery illness we still don't know a lot about. It's called Havana Syndrome, and we're learning it may have hit the FBI, with the U.S. having a warning for Russia if they're behind it. We'll explain. Okay, so for years, we've been covering this mystery sickness called the Havana Syndrome. It's this whole weird set of symptoms. Headaches, you get really dizzy. But as many as 200 American diplomats and CIA officers started feeling it after being stationed overseas as far back as 2016. Nobody knows why it's happening, although there is some suspicion maybe Russia is behind it. And new tonight, the CIA is now warning Russia if they are, they better knock it off.
It comes as the FBI is acknowledging their agents may have been hit also. Ken Delaney's all over this story. I know you scooped the FBI piece of this, Ken, so we're glad to have you on. Talk about this news about the CIA warning to Russia if they're involved in it. This is like sensitive diplomatic stuff, but they also want to get in there and make sure it's a very obvious message.
This is a big deal. CIA Director Bill Burns was in Moscow last month, and he had secret meetings with the heads of the Russian intelligence services. And there were a lot of topics he covered, but among them was this warning that he delivered to them. He didn't say that we know it's you, but he said, essentially, if it's you, you better cut it out because there'll be consequences because this is beyond the pale.
What kind of impact does that have, though? Because, listen, let's be real. Russia's not going to be like, sure, Director Burns, we'll knock it off, right? Like, that's not how they roll.
Well, it's the kind of thing that they felt like they had to do because their people are suffering, and there are a lot of suspicions that it's Russia. And remember when there were those reports of those bounties on American soldiers in Afghanistan? The Trump administration didn't do anything like this. And so that was a sort of a lesson. This is the kind of thing you issue a warning.
A little bit of like an elbow check, if you will. You also are reporting on this FBI piece of things. And I know this started with emails about access to medical care for FBI agents who were dealing with symptoms of Havana Syndrome, right?
That's right. So the FBI has never acknowledged that they have people who may have such symptoms. I got some...
And this is new, by the way. We didn't know that the FBI had agents that potentially were suffering from this before.
Well, we had reported that there were some FBI agents a couple of months ago, but we had no details about it. So I obtained some emails that showed that a former agent who had been stationed overseas in a country near Russia and came down with these symptoms, daily migraines, dizziness, and started reading about Havana Syndrome and said, wait a second, maybe that's me. I'd like to get tested. So he was interviewed by the FBI, and then he heard radio silence. And then finally he gets an email from them saying, sorry, we don't have any medical options for you. So I brought that to the FBI, and then their tune changed, and they said, no, that email doesn't reflect our current policy. They said, in fact, we're going to make sure that anybody who has symptoms gets treated. And in so doing, they essentially acknowledge, they didn't confirm that they have cases, but they acknowledge it's a possibility that they have a plan to deal with it.
That's super interesting, but especially the idea of sort of before you reached out versus after you reached out and how important it is to get medical care for these folks. I think we have a graphic of some of the FBI's response, right?
Yeah, they're saying that this email that we got does not reflect their current policy, which is to make sure that they don't have the ability to provide medical care, but they can get people into the system and get them treated. And this former agent is now being dealt with by the FBI.
How is it that we still don't know, like, what specifically causes this? There are theories, there are guesses, but like years and years later, Ken, we've been talking about this, like, no joke, with you, with Josh Letterman, with Andrea Mitchell, with like our NBC stable of reporters who's been covering this for a very long time.
Hallie, this is a devilish mystery. You know that the National Academies came out with a report that said the most likely culprit is microwave energy, and we know that Russia has studied that. But after years of investigation, the intelligence community does not have hard evidence pointing to Russia. And the longer that goes on, the more questions it raises about whether it's something else entirely.
That's a really good point. Ken Delaney, thank you very much for being on top of
Great
it.
To be with
and
you.
for joining us in our newsroom tonight. I appreciate it. Thank you. You too. Coming up, one of the country's most popular discount store chains might need to change its name because Dollar Tree is permanently raising the price of most of what it sells. So how much is it going to cost? Plus, a loss for Apple, but maybe a win for you. You finally have the right to fix your own iPhone on your own. But there's a catch. We'll explain coming up. So we all have our own Thanksgiving traditions, right? But how did it all start hundreds of years ago? Dasha Burns catches up with the native tribe whose ancestors were part of the very first Thanksgiving. And it was not about food and football. We're going to get that story in just a little bit. But first, let's get you over to 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the siblings of Ghislaine Maxwell are petitioning the UN to have her released from jail just days before her sex trafficking trial begins. She's been held without bail in New York since 2020. Prosecutors say she's an extreme flight risk. Maxwell, remember, is accused of recruiting underage girls to have sex with Jeffrey Epstein. Number 2, Italy has freed the man convicted in the 2007 murder of a British student in Italy. Rudy Guid had served most of his sentence in the murder of Meredith Kircher. This was the case that initially convicted and then acquitted American student Amanda Knox, who at the time was Kircher's roommate. Number 3, just hours after she was appointed Sweden's first ever female prime minister, Magdalena Andersson resigned. It was a real shocker. Why did she do it? Because her coalition partner quit the government and then her budget didn't pass. Andersson says it's about respect and that she doesn't want to lead the government as it currently stands. Number 4, longtime General Hospital cast member Steve Burton says he's been fired from the soap after refusing to get vaxxed. Fans of daytime television may know he is Jason Morgan. He's been Jason Morgan since 1991 on the show. He said once the vaccine mandate is lifted, he'd like to get back to playing his character. We'll see. Number 5, seems like Dollar Tree may need to change its name to the $1.25 Tree. That's how much most of its stuff is going to cost from now on. It's going to be phased in over the next few months. The company says this is not because of rising inflation. It's just a way to get some popular items back on the shelves. What's a quarter cost you? You might find out. So we've all had these moments, right? You trip, it just slips out, whatever. You've dropped your phone, and now there's a huge crack on your phone screen. Maybe, like me, you try to use it anyway for months, as long as you possibly can, because it's a real pain to fix it. Because if you have an iPhone, for example, you got to head to the Apple Store. But now the Apple Store can come right to your door. Here's why. Next year, Apple is opening up its first self-service repair online store. Screens, batteries, cameras. You can get any part you need and fix it yourself for a price, of course. Aisa Garcia-Hodges is going to break this down for us. And I have to say, the reason why this is so interesting, Apple's been fighting this for years. They don't want people to be like unscrewing their phones and fixing the screens and doing all that. But now you can, right? You can get anything to fix your own devices. Explain this.
So essentially, starting early next year, there'll be an online store available where people can get, you or I could go on there and get over 200 parts to fix what Apple is calling common issues, repair issues. Now, to be clear, this is only for newer iPhones. This is limited at first to the iPhone 12 and iPhone 13, Hallie.
So my iPod Nano, not applicable here? My drawer of old
still
junk.
Have that.
Yeah.
But no, not at first. Right now, it's just iPhone 12, iPhone 13, and then eventually it'll be Macs that have this particular M1 chip.
Listen, I'm not saying this because I'm old, right? Because I'm not, but like I can barely get my email on my phone, much less like a new screen or a new camera. If you do not have an engineering degree, like, are you going to be able to figure this out yourself?
So Apple is kind of saying like, hey, look, we're making this available. We have a quote here from them, but they're saying that, you know, this is really for people with some industry knowledge, right? Some knowledge about how to repair things. So this is, you know, while we are making this available to the general public, maybe take it with kind of a grain of salt. And if you don't have the savvy to kind of start getting into that phone, take it to a professional still.
The really important piece of this, and we have it in the graphic on our screen, it's a major reversal for Apple. And that seems to be partly because the political winds have shifted a little here. You even had President Biden, the White House, backing this right to repair movement, right? Talk about how big of a role politics is playing.
Oh, absolutely. It's huge. We're seeing this in the EU. We're seeing this in the U.S. Biden, as you said, part of his kind of platform that he is embracing now is this right to repair. And so we're seeing this in regulation and recommendations that he's making. So it's definitely not Apple just doing this out of, you know, the goodness of its heart. It's being savvy and realizing that, you know what, this is kind of the way that things are trending. Yeah. So we might as well get on board and try to control that, because then they can, you know, monetize that as well.
Listen, I know a lot of people in my life that are talking about this, that are ready for those repair kits to come out. Aisa Garcia-Hodges, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate it. You know, we usually think of Thanksgiving as a day to celebrate good food, amazing family, maybe a good football game, but that's really not the case for everyone, and especially not this year. Here's why. Tomorrow is going to be the 400th anniversary of the very first Thanksgiving ever. And for people like the Wampanoags, that brings up a lot of painful memories. They're the native tribe whose ancestors were actually part of the first Thanksgiving. They helped the Pilgrims survive all those years ago, but their kindness cost them. Dasha Burns spent some time with them to learn the real story of the first Thanksgiving.
Here's a story most Americans think of when they imagine the first Thanksgiving. The Pilgrims traveled to North America aboard the Mayflower in the fall of 1620. The Pilgrims struggled to survive until a local tribe, the Wampanoags, came to their aid. And in the fall of 1621, in a colonial village just like this, the Pilgrims and the Wampanoags came together for a big feast, the first Thanksgiving.
But those who know the history best say the feel-good lore overshadows the real story.
What do you think is the biggest misconception around Thanksgiving?
Everyone thinks that we were welcome there, and that really wasn't the case.
Bryan Whedon is the chairman of the Mashpee Wampanoags. He says his people have lived in southeastern Massachusetts for more than 10,000 years.
I think it's important to know that the Wampanoag people are still here. Some of the challenges that we faced over the past 400 years are still going on today in our current world.
Here's what really happened in 1621. Both pilgrims and natives were in trouble. Each side needed the other. They made an alliance.
There was sickness. There was fighting that had taken place. It was a roll of the dice, but you needed to survive.
Stephen Peters and his mother, Paula, say their ancestors showed the pilgrims how to live off the land the settlers would eventually take. What is now Plymouth, Massachusetts, was once a region the Wampanoags called Patuxet.
To say that the friendly Indians taught the pilgrims how to hunt and fish and survive and would have otherwise perished is true. But the treatment of the Wampanoag, both before and after, is another truth that doesn't get told.
Over the last 400 years, the tribe lost more than 99% of their land, colonized by the one-time newcomers. And on that first Thanksgiving...
Were there headdresses?
No.
Were there shared turkeys?
Possibly. I mean, there's a lot of turkey around.
Was there an invitation?
No way.
No Wampanoags were invited.
Instead, the tribe arrived not to feast, but to fight. They'd been alarmed by the sounds of muskets that the pilgrims fired to celebrate their first harvest.
They felt that there was a threat, whether it be a threat against them or a threat against their newly formed allies. So they were ready to go to combat. In the smoothing over of the situation, they invited the warriors and their families to stay, which they did for 3 days.
But for the Wampanoags today, the fourth Thursday in November is a national day of mourning. Mourning the centuries of loss that followed that day of bounty.
They took our kindness for our weakness and used it to their advantage. 400 years later, and the fact that our tribe only owns half of 1% of our ancestral territory, I think is unacceptable.
Even now, the Wampanoags are still fighting for that small portion of land they have left. The Obama administration had placed about 300 acres of land in a trust for the Wampanoags. But Trump's White House tried to undo that, putting the land in limbo. They're now waiting on action from the current administration.
You know, it's on President Biden and the administration, the Department of Interior, to do the right thing. I'm sure that he would want to spend his first Thanksgiving in the White House knowing that this was taken care of for the tribe that started it all, and unfortunately I can't say that today.
It also marginalizes our story because of the myths that are associated with the Thanksgiving holiday. We aren't erased so much as we're overwritten. It's a time when we as Wampanoag need to reflect back on the sacrifices of our ancestors and remind people that there was a time before 1620 and there was a time before the Mayflower, and the consequences of that colonization were really devastating.
Dasha Burns reporting there for us on that important story. Coming up here on the show, Hawaii saying aloha to social distancing, with the governor relaxing some COVID restrictions across the state. He's catching some heat with people who wonder, is that really the best call with this COVID surge across the country? Plus, she's a sideline staple on Sunday Night Football. Obviously, we're talking about Michele Tafoya. We're getting up close and personal on her turf in tonight's Backstory. So what does it take to tackle some of the biggest stories in the NFL? We're going to ask Michele Tafoya just that in our Backstory next, ahead of tomorrow night's football game. But first, NBC covers hundreds of stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Let's start with our Midwest Bureau and some devastating news from there. A 55-year-old woman and a 4-year-old girl have died after an explosion in Flint, Michigan. This is video you're looking at from a home security camera. It's the moment one of the houses on the street burst into flames. 3 houses ended up being destroyed altogether. Several others were very badly damaged. From our West Coast Bureau, Hawaii is lifting some of its COVID rules. Starting December 1st, next week, you're not going to see any more social distance restrictions on restaurants, bars, and gyms. And the governor is also going to leave it up to individual counties to put in place any kind of emergency orders on a case-by-case basis. And from our Northeast Bureau, Rutgers University is honoring the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg next week. naming a building on its Newark campus for her. Ginsburg taught at Rutgers Law School in the 60s and 70s. Now, time to get the backstory, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into the bigger picture. And listen, I'm willing to bet after you're done the turkey tomorrow, after you eat your stuffing, after you have your pumpkin pie, you might turn on a football game, right? So let me channel my best Sports Center anchor impression here and tell you about the 3 matchups that are happening on Thanksgiving Day, starting with the traditional one between the Bears and the Lions, then the Raiders and Cowboys. Then there's the nightcap on NBC between the Saints and the Bills. And that's where you'll find NBC's Michele Tafoya. Michele Tafoya is with us now. Michele, welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show tonight.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so listen, Thanksgiving weekend, Thanksgiving Day, all about football, right? I know you're covering the Saints and the Bills game tomorrow. Talk us through how you prep for something like that. Like, when does that start? Is it kind of something that's always happening? Walk us through it.
Yeah. It's always happening. It's never ending because you could be preparing for 2 games at once. All the things going on in the back of your mind. We just finished a Sunday game and it goes right into this Thursday night game, and you're thinking about both as you're progressing through the week. I spent a lot of time on the phone with players, with people affiliated with the players. I just talked to Josh Allen's quarterback coach a few minutes ago, and that is a lot of the preparation, is digging in, finding out what these players are up to, what they're thinking about, not only game-wise, but on the Thanksgiving night game, we get to have a little fun. You know, we get to ask them, who were you in the backyard when you played as a little kid? You get to ask them, what's your favorite side at the Thanksgiving table? And 99% of them say mac and cheese. And, it's the fun stuff, too, that gets to happen on Thanksgiving. But there's a lot of prep. It's ongoing. A lot of it is really tedious and mundane, and I won't bore you with that.
Well, listen, tedious and mundane is like, how I roll here. So I get it.
Yeah.
I wonder, especially at a moment like this, and there have been so many moments in your career covering football where you've dealt with not just like the X's and O's and the football piece of it, but the headlines that have come up, outside of that, whether it's, concussions, whether it's what we're looking at now with vaccinations for players, et cetera. How are you thinking about, like, okay, reporting on the game strategy versus reporting on some of these things off the field that sports fans and viewers might be interested in?
I know this sounds like I'm a player, but you take what the game gives you. If there are issues that we know that are timely, a COVID issue, a political issue, a contract issue, a legal issue that we know we have to cover to be, a respected broadcast that's documenting everything, then we find our moments to put those in. So it's very nuanced. It's a lot of balancing. It's picking your spots. And sometimes you're teed up for something and it's going to work perfectly at this moment because of what just happened in the game. And boom, someone throws an interception and now your whole plan changes. Yeah. So it's very much dictated to us by what's happening in the game.
So our viewers, I think so many viewers know you. They know you in the world of sports. You've expanded beyond that a little bit, especially recently. I know you were on The View a couple weeks ago, caught a little heat over some of your opinions on vaccine mandates. How do you think about sharing, as a public figure, your personal views, right? Like, how do you think about how much to reveal of, like, Michele Tafoya, the person, versus Michele Tafoya, like the sideline reporter that we all know?
Yeah, I understand that there's a balance there because when I got into sports, it was specifically because I wanted to avoid all the controversial and the downside of the news and, all that stuff. I wanted to do something that was really fun. And that's what sports is supposed to be. And so we want our telecast to be fun, to be an escape from some of that. But as we all know, the world has changed a little bit and some of these things intersect. So it's a delicate balance. I didn't mind sharing some of my opinions on The View, but I do have a lot to say. I've had a lot of life experiences. I've dealt with anorexia as a teenager. I've dealt with infertility as an adult. I've dealt with adopting a baby internationally. There's just a large scope of my life that is really, really important to me. But you got to pick your spots.
And I think about you and your family, who I know is so important to you. And like, Thanksgiving is a family holiday, but here you are working on Thanksgiving. You work all the Thanksgivings. Yeah. Listen, as news reporters, like, I get the idea of working on a holiday, but how do you do that, right? Like, are you bringing the fam for Thanksgiving dinner before the game? Are you FaceTiming in? Like, how are you managing tomorrow?
my family has only known one life. From the time I've had these kids, they've seen me maybe on a handful of Thanksgivings that they're probably too young to remember before I did the Thanksgiving night game. So Christmases, same thing. We adapt. Believe me, it pulls at my heartstrings. I've missed a lot of great stuff in my kids' lives, a lot of it. Every reporter does, right? Yeah. The job is what it is. It's what we sign up for, and then we kind of manage around that.
I mean, listen, that's the working parent bargain, right? Whether you're in sports or news or doing anything else. So, Michele Tafoya, we're so glad to have you for tonight's backstory. Thank you for pulling back the curtain and sharing a little bit of what it's like for you on the sidelines, on the field. We're excited to watch the broadcast tomorrow night. Thank you.
Enjoy it. Thanks so much for having me.
Coming up, Father, Son, and House of Gucci. That movie in theaters today. And while we don't know whether it's going to be a big box office hit, the memes are fire. Is this a new marketing trend? We'll talk about it. So there's this new movie that's out today, House of Gucci. It's Lady Gaga's new thing. You might have seen the trailer, but I'm willing to bet you've probably seen the memes if you're at all any kind of online person. There's this promo photo of Adam Driver and Lady Gaga. She tweeted out months before the release. There's all kinds of snippets from the movie that have been going viral. But listen, we're not an entertainment movie show, right? We're a news show, and there's a real news angle to this here, which is how to market this, the viral marketing that this has all prompted. Callan Rosenblatt, our girl, is here to break it all down. Callan, can I be 100% real with you? Like, I know very few of these memes, but I'm not going to try to do it, but the Father, Son, House of Gucci one, like, that's one that everybody knows. It's gone super viral. It's the hype. It's the hype around what Lady Gaga releases that then her fans, push to go viral that then, cycles more people into watching, right?
Absolutely. I mean, when you are a pop star of the magnitude that Lady Gaga is, you have scores of what we call stans, which are super fans, who are dedicated heart and soul to promoting what you do, whether it's a pop album or whether it's a movie. And creating memes is sort of part of this strategy to have other people fall in love with the pop star that you're in love with and have them go support that entity or that thing, that movie, that album, what have you. So yeah, fans are driving this. It's just kind of a guerrilla marketing tactic almost, and it's spun by fans.
But is it expandable beyond, the Lady Gaga realm? Meaning, do you see this as a viable marketing strategy, beyond somebody who is a mega pop star whose stans are going to, make Adam Driver go viral?
So here's the thing. When you have an entity that does become a meme, I think you can really lean into it. But I think you can't force it. Something that the internet is really good at picking up on is when something is inauthentic.
100%.
So
100%.
If you're gonna try to make a meme and you're gonna try to force it, it's gonna flop.
Like if it smells like brand, you know what I mean, underneath it, people are not going to be into it, right? Don't you? I feel like that's part of it.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, there's a meme that says silence brand if you don't want to come off as a brand.
Right. There you go. Do you think she's expanding her fan base here? Because you also look at Lady Gaga she's a person, right? She's somebody who is an actress and a singer. She's also a business in and of herself. Do you see this as expanding her fan base beyond what's already there? Because right now it seems like the whole internet is standing Gaga.
Yeah, and Hallie, to be completely honest with you, I am a massive Lady Gaga stan.
Callan,
I have been in love with her.
We need to put that in your
decade.
intro. That's called disclosure. We need to say that sooner in this segment.
Yeah, I am biased, so I will say that I am biased. But I do think that she is expanding her base with this. She's really good at knowing what the internet is talking about. When her song Stupid Love leaked, she shared this incredible stock image of like a little girl in a balaclava, like with an iPad an iPod, like listening to music. It's very funny. She gets the sort of humor of the internet. And I think because of that, she's able to expand her fan base. And I think she's able to bring new people into the fold. But since Gaga came onto the scene, she's been an avant-garde force in the sort of celebrity sphere. And I think people just want to know, what is she going to do next? And so they're going to watch sort of regardless.
Wait, I have 5 seconds left. But as a Lady Gaga mega fan, are you yay or nay on the accent in this movie that she's caught some flack for?
Oh, it is full camp, and I am 100% yay. Okay. I am on board with this whole movie.
Yeah, it's the camp for me. Callan, thank you so much. Appreciate you. That does it for this hour. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. We're taking the day off tomorrow, but we'll be right back here for you on Friday, same time, same place. Our coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.